The year is 1998, and BMW releases a car that many people would later call one of its best. The E46 BMW 3 Series. It looked more refined, more complete, and more modern than what came before it. But at the same time, some enthusiasts argue this was the moment BMW started to shift away from what originally made the brand special. So, which one is it? At the time, the E46 had a lot to prove. It followed the E36, a car that had already built a strong reputation, and expectations were high. BMW's approach wasn't to reinvent the formula, it was to refine it. The design became smoother, the interior more upscale, and the overall experience more polished. It didn't feel radical, it felt finished. But that approach came with trade-offs, because while the E46 improved in almost every measurable way, it also marked a subtle shift. Cars across the industry were becoming heavier, more insulated, and more focused on comfort. And the E46 sat right in the middle of that transition. Not fully raw, not fully modern. And that's where the conversation around this car really starts. On paper, the E46 didn't rely on big numbers to stand out. Models like the 330i came equipped with a naturally aspirated 3.0-liter inline-six, producing around 225 horsepower. Not slow, but not groundbreaking either. And that was kind of the point. What mattered more was how the power was delivered, smooth, predictable, and consistent. It didn't overwhelm the driver, it worked with them, and over time, that became one of the defining traits of the car. Power was sent to the rear wheels through a 5 or 6-speed manual or automatic, combined with near-perfect weight. Distribution, the E46 delivered a driving experience that many describe as balanced. The steering was direct, the chassis predictable, and the car responded in a way that made it easy to understand what it was doing at any given moment. It wasn't the most aggressive car in its class, but it didn't really try to be. Instead, it focused on being consistent, and whether you were driving casually or pushing harder, the car behaved in a way that built confidence, and that consistency started to matter more than outright performance numbers. Especially as competitors began chasing power over field around this time. Other manufacturers were leaning into bigger engines, more aggressive styling, and higher horsepower figures, trying to stand out in a rapidly changing market. But BMW stayed relatively restrained, with the E46 choosing to refine rather than reinvent. And, depending on how you look at it, that either makes the car incredibly well thought out or slightly conservative. With the arrival of the BMW M3 E46, the conversation shifted. Under the hood was the S54, a 3.2-liter naturally aspirated inline-six producing 333 horsepower, with a redline just over 8,000 RPM compared to the standard models. It was a completely different experience. Sharper, more aggressive, and far more focused. It didn't just add power, it changed the character of the car. The throttle response was immediate, the engine demanded to be revved out, and the entire driving experience became more intense. Paired with a 6-speed manual or the SMG automated transmission, the E46 M3 became a car that could handle both daily driving and serious performance use. And for many people, this version became the reference point for what the E46 could be at its best. But even then, the debate didn't go away, because depending on who you ask, the E46 M3 either represents the peak of BMW's naturally aspirated era, or one of the last moments before things started to change, and that's where opinions start to split, because the E46 as a whole can be seen in two very different ways. On one hand, it represents a high point, a car that refined BMW's formula into something incredibly well-rounded. On the other, it marks the beginning of a shift toward a more filtered, more modern driving experience. Both arguments have some truth to them. But why does this matter? Because the E46 sits at a very specific point in BMW's history. It exists right between not the most advanced, but it manages to bring those elements together in a way that feels cohesive. And for a lot of drivers, that balance ends up being more important than any single standout feature. It's a car that doesn't immediately overwhelm you with extremes, but reveals itself over time. The more you drive it, the more it makes sense. and that might be why it continues to hold such a strong place in the conversation today, not necessarily because it dominates in one category, but because it consistently delivers across all of them. While newer cars have become faster, more advanced, and more capable, on paper, they've also become more complex, more assisted, and in some cases, more distant. The E46 doesn't completely avoid that shift, but it hasn't fully committed to it either. It sits right in between, offering just enough modern refinement to be usable every day, while still holding on to enough mechanical feel to keep drivers engaged. And that balance is becoming harder to find, which is why, years later, the fact that the E46 managed to do something not every car can, it stayed relevant. And in a segment where expectations constantly evolve, that might be the most important thing of all. The E46 isn't just remembered, it's still debated. Some see it as the last truly great 3 Series, others see it as the beginning of a new direction. But regardless of which side you fall on, it's hard to ignore.